My name is Khadija Anderson, and I am a project manager at Blackstone Technology Group, leading a team of DevOps engineers who support a complex platform with over 20 applications. So, what to do when your foundation fails you? Disaster recovery and contingency planning for platforms. Now, how many of you have had an unplanned outage in the last month? Okay, how many of you had a disaster recovery plan in place to address this unplanned outage? Turns out a DR plan is pretty important, right? Well, what is a disaster recovery environment? It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. If there's a disaster like a hurricane, a fire, or even a meteor crashing into your primary data center, this environment is intended to help you recover your platform, applications, and data. It's your backup environment. Now here's what a platform might look like with a DR environment. You have your web tier and database tier and your live production environment, and you have the same thing in your disaster recovery environment, just on a smaller scale. You could also have a proxy server or redirect server to determine where you would send your request to. Great, so now you have a backup environment, but what's next? What do you do? Where do you start? Who do you contact? Well, this is where contingency planning comes in handy. Unfortunately, winging it doesn't work so well for situations like this. I recommend implementing a regular contingency exercise to test your failover procedure. This could be done quarterly, every 6 months, or annually. The purpose is to test the viability of your failover procedure, so make sure the exercise closely mirrors what the process would look like in the event of a real disaster. You should start by determining your roles and responsibilities. Who's on the recovery team? Who's leading the exercise? Who's going to notify the pertinent parties that this exercise is happening? Who is responsible for documentation? You could also set a recovery time objective. What's the maximum acceptable length of time that your platform can be unavailable? For some of you, this may be predetermined by your stakeholders by what's called a service level objective, or an SLO. You could also set a failure rate or threshold to determine when to actually fail over. For example, if requests are taking longer than 45 seconds, automatically send the request to the secondary environment. You could also direct half of the traffic to the secondary environment if requests are taking over a certain length of time. Next, document the step-by-step process for this failover procedure. Make sure your tasks are specific. Document who will be doing which steps and the estimated time to complete each step. Now, prior to your contingency exercise, there may be some preliminary steps that need to be performed. For example, temporarily increasing the resources in your DR environment, checking your DR hardware to ensure that things are functioning properly, and notifying the appropriate parties of this upcoming exercise. Now, it's time to redirect the traffic. Generally, the web requests that come in are directed to your primary environment. For this contingency exercise, you would direct those requests to your secondary environment to actually fail over. Again, this could be done through the use of a proxy server or redirect server. Now it's time to validate that the failover was successful. The recovery team should test to ensure that all functionality is working as expected. The stakeholders should also perform regression testing to ensure that the switch was successful from a user perspective. Once testing has successfully been completed, it's time to fail back to the primary environment. Remember, this is just a test, so you'll want to fail back to your primary environment sooner rather than later. In the event of a real disaster, you remain in your secondary data center until the primary is back up. Again, test, test, test. The recovery team should again test to verify that the fail back to the primary environment was successful. The stakeholders should also perform regression testing again to ensure that the fail back to the primary environment was successful. Now, a lot of these steps can be automated or at least planned ahead of time. This will help to save time, ensure your process is repeatable, and increase efficiency each time the exercise is performed. If there are several applications on your platform, I recommend performing this contingency exercise with your team first, prior to looping in the stakeholders. This will enable you to test your contingency exercise and adjust, if necessary, prior to starting the real thing. You could choose 1 or 2 applications on your platform for this internal exercise. Say you host Amazon or Target, for example. You would still go through every step in the process, just on a smaller scale. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, document, document, document. Documentation might not be the most fun, but this must be a repeatable and hopefully painless process. So documenting every step along the way is an absolute necessity. If you have questions on what I presented, or if you would like to discuss this further, please feel free to reach out to me. And remember, if your foundation fails you, make sure your processes or lack thereof don't fail you too. Thank you.
All right. Nice work.